Hello everyone and welcome to the fifth episode of my Road to World Chess Champion. Now in this episode we are going to be taking a look at the fifth round of Aeroflot Open 2025. In fifth round I was playing with the black pieces against Baradaran, Tamadon, Arian from Iran. He's rated 2308. I was rated a bit higher at that time with 2376. So I've lost the last two games, so obviously I wanted to come back. So yeah, let's take a look at the game. He goes e4, I go c5, knight d3, knight c6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, e5. Now we get this Kalashnikov Sicilian, how they call it. And I play this because, as I said already, I wanted to win very, very badly. And when you want to win, especially with the black pieces, you often need to take a lot of risks in order to kind of get an unbalanced position to maybe try to outplay your opponent. So in this game I went for this very risky kind of opening choice. Now he goes knight d5, d6, c4, this is all standard here. Bishop e6, knight 5 to c3. Now knight 5 to c3 is it's an interesting move. It's not the most common one. The most common one, of course, is knight 1 to c3, sorry. And then if black goes a6, knight goes to a3, and then proceeds to come to c2, and we get a pretty solid position. Like black's plans are maybe go g6, maybe bishop g7, sorry, bishop g7, knight f6, castles, and maybe rook c8, knight d4. So it's like very kind of dynamic sort of position. Maybe f5 somewhere in some positions, or maybe even b5, which we'll see later in the game. But he decides to go knight 5 to c3. I respond with knight f6, kind of a very natural response. Maybe rook c8 was a bit better, knight d5, g6, and try to exchange these bishops. But knight f6 seems natural, so it's kind of okay. Bishop e2, maybe bishop d3 was a bit better, but again, bishop e2 is just natural sort of move. Very simple way to play with white. Bishop e2, we have g6, kind of this standard plan. Bishop e3, bishop g7, he castles, I castle, knight a3, a6, and eventually we get a position that is a transposition from the variation that I showed you before. For example, if he went knight 1 to c3 instead of this knight 5 to c3 move, we could have ended up in the same position as we did in the game with this transposition. So yeah, we end up in this position with knight a6, knight c2, rook c8, kind of standard plans. Now he goes b3. Maybe b3, it's not the best move actually. Maybe better is f3, and black goes kind of knight h5, angling for this f4 square. Maybe queen d2 would come kind of a pretty equal position. But b3 actually creates a weakness, and the weakness is this knight on c3, because you see when the pawn is on b2, it was protecting the knight on c3, but when you push b3, nothing is protecting the knight on c3 anymore. So I use this to my advantage. I go b5, and the point behind b5 is that if you take back, c takes b5, you just take, a takes b5. Now if you take with the bishop, I would go knight a7, very kind of interesting idea. attacking this knight on c3, and also taking kind of attacking this bishop on b5 also. And the point is that if you take on a7, I take on c3. Now, kind of you can see that black is getting all this activity. Like this rook is very active. It's on the open c file. The knight is angling towards e4. Maybe queen a8 will also come attacking the pawn on e4 and bishop on a7. Also taking this open file. Maybe d5 eventually. So it's like very dynamic sort of position. But he takes the pawn on b5 with the knight, which is one of the possible options. I take on e4, goes f3, knight f6, knight takes d6, and here we end up in a position where, yes, I am down a pawn, but again, all of my pieces are very active. I go rook a8, and kind of this rook is on an open file. Maybe next I will play knight d5, attacking the bishop, attacking this knight, maybe e4, this bishop would become alive. So yeah, it's very kind of, again, dynamic sort of position. You get knight e4, queen d8, and just, I don't want to trade queens, because if we would trade the queens, he would just get two beautiful pass pawns, and I would end up in a pretty bad spot. So I don't want to trade queens. I go queen to d8. He goes bishop to f2. I go rook to d8, queen e1. And now I take on e4. Takes. I go knight to d4. Now if he takes on d4 with the knight, I will just take back he takes d4 and threatening pawn to d3. And if he would blockade the pawn with bishop to d3, I would proceed with bishop to e5 and then rook a3. Again, all my pieces are like very, very active on these squares. The rook is blockading the pawns. Maybe queen e7 would come, rook a8, attacking the pawn on a2. But he decides to go knight e3, which is a mistake. Better was to take a d4 actually. But he decides to go knight e3. We have queen b7, attacking the pawn on e4. Goes bishop f3. I go rook a3, kind of blockading these pawns. On a2 and b3, maybe rook a8 will come next, attacking the pawn. He goes bishop to d1. And you see, when I have all of these active pieces on d4 and on a3, he kind of runs out of moves, you can say, because you can see here he goes bishop to f3, and then I go rook a3, and he moves the bishop again, like for some reason. So white is kind of stuck. You know, this rook is not doing anything, the bishop's not doing anything, the queen is just standing there, and the rook is just protecting the pawn on a2. And I have all of these active pieces, so I have a better position. So here I take on e4, because obviously the bishop went away from guarding the pawn on e4, because kind of white is kind of stuck, right? But white needs to make a move. So he goes bishop d1, yeah, I take a pawn on e4. He goes knight c4, trying to trade the queens. I take, he takes, bishop takes c4, pawn takes c4. Here I play this move e4, with the idea that he can't take, obviously, because then I would go knight f3 check, takes, and bishop takes a1, end up with an extra exchange and a winning position. But he goes rook b1. Of course, he sees that he can't take the pawn on e4. He goes rook b1, going away from this attack of the bishop on g7. I go f5, protecting the pawn, kind of building this massive pawn chain on the light squares. Goes bishop b3, protecting the pawn on a2. I take, he takes, because if he would take with the rook, I would just go rook takes a2 and end up with an extra pawn and end up winning winning position. He goes a takes b3. I go rook to d2, kind of trying to build this stack of rooks on the second rank. Well, rook b to d1 already, because if he doesn't do anything about these rooks, I'll just come to a2 and kind of checkmate him on these squares g2 and h2. So he tries to trade off the rooks. I obviously take, and take the free pawn. And from here on, it's just a winning position, but it's just a matter of technique to win from here, because like black has this massive pawn chain and white has this lonely pawn on c4, which will eventually be taken by my rook or by my king, and then I will end up with 2 extra pawns. So he goes bishop a7, b7, kind of I bring the king in, attack the pawn, bring the king in again, and eventually I take this pawn. He tries to create something on the king side, but nothing works out. Goes back. Now I try to push these pawns. I even sacrifice on h7, give a check on c5. King goes to f1, I check, push again, bring the king in, d4, b4, king d3. And here I am threatening bishop to c3 with to f1 checkmate next, when the king goes away to d1, and he has nothing to do about it. It's just unstoppable checkmate. So yeah, this game was pretty smooth. My kind of risk in the opening paid out, you can say, because I played a very, very risky opening to win, because I really wanted to win. So yeah, this was episode 5. I thank you guys for watching. Like and subscribe, and see you in the next episode.